everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of We're All Fine. This is Holly, and with me is my brilliant, amazing co-host, Carly. Hi, Carly.
Hey, Holly. Hey, everyone.
We're changing things up a little bit for this week. There's been, I don't know if you guys have noticed, there's some stuff happening in the country right now, and to bring it even a little bit closer to home, there's a lot happening within our state and within our city, and for a lot of us, even within our friend and family communities, that it's all relatively new. Not to place a date on it, but I might say since the 20th.
Yeah, it was like January.
Something right along in there. So I actually got to thinking with one of these kind of significant issues that maybe instead of doom scrolling like I've been doing. Have you been doing that, Carly?
Oh, yeah. No, my thumbs are exhausted. I think they have bigger muscles than like biceps at this point. Just, every time my phone vibrates, I'm terrified it's an Apple News article. It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine.
We're all fine. So, and I'm really trying not to engage in any shenanigans on social media, like talking to people whose opinions I might find mildly offensive in any number of ways, because I don't know that that's the best way to handle that. So it occurred to me that maybe we need to branch out and provide information. That maybe education is what people need, and maybe education from people who are actually living, experiencing, feeling some of the changes taking place.
Yeah, which is honestly since the beginning of time, like what women have done. Like when we had the Comstock laws in the US, women would write very small instructions on how to use homemade contraceptives and where to get help and access for things. And they would quietly pass them to one another in handkerchiefs when they were actually able to be in the public sphere, and they were able to communicate that way. And really from the beginning of time, when it feels like our communities, our people, our families are under attack, or that there are people that are heavily against you just for your existence, women of all backgrounds, of all ethnicities, have been the ones that have said, okay, stop. Information is key. And so to be able to do that in the smallest way, like with our handful, sometimes higher handfuls. We are an international podcast. People don't know that, but we have people in other countries that listen to us. So, one or two, it counts. But for our international podcast, to help in this moment in time, I think is really powerful. And it's something that I'm super honored to do. So good idea, Holly.
Woot woot. Well, to help us with this, I am so incredibly delighted to introduce our guest today. She is kind of a staple in the Colorado Springs community, just as a brilliant artist and performer and music teacher, voice teacher. She's just kind of all of the things. But more than that, she's bringing a really personal perspective to some of the things going on right now. So, Miriam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited.
We've talked about having you on the podcast for a while.
I have been begging. I tell ya.
Mostly because you're just really funny. And I feel like every time I talk with you, you always have such these pearls of wisdom that just kind of fall from your lips, that it's been kind of hard to figure out what we would have you on the show for, because there's just so many things.
It's true. We've come up with lists of topics, and then people that would fit those. And I can even maybe send it to you if I can find it in my notes on my phone. You were next to 4 of them.
No pressure. Well, thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be here, and you guys are awesome, and I love this podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Leave a review. What?
Yes, 100%. How do I do that again?
So, Miriam, the perspective that you are bringing to us today, you are a parent of 2 amazing children, and you also happen to be a parent of a transgender child. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I think most of my information on anything to do with this issue at all comes from my friend group, any of the things that I've read online, but I feel like there's just a lot that I don't understand about it. So I'm apologizing in advance for my ignorance, because this is a very multi-layered issue, I think, that so many of us just have no idea about. Just kind of what's in the news.
Yeah. And what's in the news is really not very accurate. My child came out initially as non-binary in middle school. Actually started the conversation asking for a binder. And my child was like, "Hey, Mom, I need a binder." And I went, "Great. What size rings do you need? An inch, half an inch, quarter inch, 2 inch?" And my child was like, "No, a binder." And I went, "Oh, that's a different conversation than the one I thought we were having." And so we talked about it because there are risks associated with binding incorrectly. It can permanently damage your ribs. It creates issues for your lungs. But my ex-husband and I both were absolutely fine with it. We got the binder. And then later on in my child's journey, they realized they were not non-binary, but they were male.
Can I back up a little bit?
Absolutely.
Can you break down non-binary? What does that mean?
So people are born with a biological sex, which externally may or may not be correct, not just for gender, but even physiologically, there are dozens of variations on chromosomes and how people are born. We hear about male and female, right? Which is XX for female and XY for male, but there are some that have XXY or XYY or all kinds of variations. There are so many variations on that. And we have intersex people, which way back in the day we called hermaphrodite, which we don't use that term anymore. We use intersex. And that is somebody who is born with both sets of sexual organs. So for instance, a person may have ovaries and a penis, or testicles and a vagina. So really, biological sex is far more complicated than just the two binary genders, sexes that we think of, male and female, as well as gender being different than biological sex. Just a quick jump ahead is part of the issue surrounding trans is people don't understand that biological sex is not just male or female. It's all of the things in between. So non-binary really reflects gender, not sex. And it's people who feel that they are not necessarily one gender or another. It might be somebody who sometimes feels male, sometimes feels female, sometimes feels androgynous. There are people who may completely present like they look female, they present female, they're wearing very stereotypically girly clothes and makeup and have traditionally female characteristics or hairstyles, but they don't feel like a woman or a girl. They feel like nothing or somewhere in between, or they feel male or vice versa. So non-binary is somebody who, for whatever the reason, does not feel like they belong to one gender or another. There are variations on that. There's gender fluid. So somebody who might feel that one day they feel more female, one day they feel more male, another day they feel like they might be somewhere in between. And these kinds of human beings have existed for centuries upon centuries. I mean, this is not a new thing. It happens in nature too. It's not like this. It's not like one day I'm going to wake up and think, yeah, I don't think I want to be a woman anymore. It's not how that works. So yeah, so non-binary is somebody who doesn't fit squarely into the gender binary as we have thought of it for so many years. So somebody who feels like they're not necessarily only one gender or another. They fit somewhere on the spectrum or nowhere else.
Okay, so good. I'm glad we're starting with this like very basic step of understanding that there is a difference between sex and gender. Is that
Yep,
correct? So biological
absolutely.
sex different from gender expression.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
That's a
Okay.
great way to put it. And with that said, there is scientific evidence that shows somebody who is transgender, no matter where they fall, whether they're gender fluid or transgender male, transgender female, non-binary, whatever that looks like, there are actually physiological differences in their brain activity and even in the way their brain is formed. Different areas of the brain light up. You can see that there is a physiological difference in somebody who is transgender versus somebody who is cisgender, which means you identify as the gender that matches the sex that you were assigned at birth. So I am a cisgender female. I was born female with all of the female parts. I have two X chromosomes. I look female, and I know that I am female, just as like Sarah McBride, who is a transgender female, who is one of the senators right now. She was born assigned male at birth, so she had all of the male gonads and all of that, but she knew that was incorrect. She is a woman. And I can't speak for Sarah. I don't know her. I think she's amazing. Her book is just out of this world. But there are MRI scans of people who are transgender where you can see the difference in the brain activity versus a person who is cisgender, like I am, like you are. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
With your kiddo, before that moment of being asked for a binder, was there anything that you noticed beforehand or that may have given you any indication?
Nope, nothing. My child never showed any signs of gender exploration until they ended up in an extracurricular activity with the other kids in this activity, in this group. A lot of the kids who were anywhere from, I would say, 11 or 12 to 16, a lot of the kids were exploring gender identity and sexuality, and, because it starts early, right? Middle school. But they were exploring gender identity, and the conversations amongst this group of friends was being had and being explored and being embraced, which I think is really interesting. And when my child asked for a binder and we had the conversation about gender, and then my child had the same conversation with their father, one of my concerns was, well, is this just a trend? Is this, just something that they're checking out? But also, okay, what if it is just something that's going to be a passing moment in their life? I don't care. I mean, isn't that what childhood is for? To figure out who we are as humans and, explore everything there is. I mean, childhood is about exploration and figuring out who we are and figuring out the world around us and how we fit into this external world when, our kids have spent so much time figuring out the family dynamic, and now it becomes figuring out who they are in a bigger world. And so even if it had just been a passing decision and they had changed their minds, okay, I'm not going to stop that. I don't want to stop them from exploring science or music or art. Why would I stop them from exploring how they want to express themselves and who they are as human beings? My goal is to raise good humans who can contribute to society, who can be happy and loving and kind and empathic and contribute to the society and making the world a better place, whether that's one person at a time or one moment at a time. But I don't care what clothes you wear, as long as you're appropriately covered when you're supposed to be appropriately covered. And if one of my kiddos is feeling like they're not able to be authentic to who they are, as long as no one's getting hurt in the process, that's a caveat you can put a pin in for later discussions. Great. You want to dress up as a clown? Dress up as a clown. You want to wear fairy wings? Wear fairy wings. No, my job isn't to pass that judgment. It's to provide a safe space for them to discover themselves.
I think I'm gonna get misty-eyed quite a bit during this conversation. Just like mom from mom and being someone who was raised by some of the most beautiful people on the face of this earth, and they are part of the LGBT community. And I was so I was so blessed to have such strong people that decided that they would live in their authentic truth. To have that as my closest role models is the greatest gift that I've ever had. And so to hear someone as a parent say, like, I'm not afraid of who you are, is so fucking important. And I just think it's really cool. I think it's so incredible because when a child tells us who they are, we need to listen. The fact that you heard and listened, and the fact that you were okay with it being temporary, or if this was who your child was, what was going to be okay.
That's something to jump on right there. Is
That's
that,
incredible.
Miriam, you said, okay, I hear we're the binder, sure, and let's go with this. And if that's how you want to express yourself, that's how you want to express yourself. What was the next step? Because clearly you didn't just stay with binder.
I mean, it started with a binder and a change of pronouns. That one was hard for me, not because, oh my God, I'm using the wrong pronouns, but it was hard for me to wrap my head around they, them pronouns being used in a singular way, which is ridiculous because we do it every single day. People are like, I don't use pronouns. There they go. Well, that was a pronoun. So anyway, but it was hard for me to do the work of like saying they or them or their, knowing I was talking about a singular person. I mean, my mother had been an English teacher, and so I grew up as, the grammar is everything. And I had to really remember that grammatically that's still correct. And so
I feel that.
Yeah, it was a hard one for me. And I had to do a lot of practicing. And I would practice when my kiddo wasn't with me. When I spoke about my child with people, I would use they, them pronouns, which you seriously have, like, people who are like, I accept you, but then they use the wrong pronouns when the person isn't there. That's not acceptance. Yeah, so that was the hardest part. My ex-husband was amazing as well. He's the one that got our child the binder. He was working in higher education at the moment and had a few transgender and non-binary students. So he knew far more about binding than I did and where to get good quality binders, which that was also a learning curve. I mean, my kid, when they came and asked for a binder, they had like 2-inch thick stack of papers about how to bind safely, how to make sure they didn't hurt themselves because they came prepared, which was amazing because I didn't know anything about binding. I didn't know what it could do to the body, the harm that could come from the body. I didn't understand it. So yeah, it was just, it was a learning curve. And then to know that my kiddo had felt so strongly about it that they came to me with all of the research already. And of course, women wear bras, right? Men wear jock straps during sports or dance belts when they're dancing. It's not different than that, except that it's a far tighter piece of clothing that you put on. Much like a hair transplant, it is literally gender-affirming care, right? I was like, okay, like, how do we support you? What can I do? And then about maybe 6 months later, my child had been struggling with depression and self-harm and suicidal ideation, because middle school is hard and it's the time when a lot of children experience these things anyway. But my kiddos were so hard, and there was that kind of self-harm happening, and they were in therapy. And they came to me one evening and said that they weren't non-binary, that they were male. And he was terrified. They were terrified. Like, my child was so scared that he was not going to be accepted. Well, I was like, okay, you want me to start using different pronouns? Great. You have to tell your dad, who will be equally supportive, and he was. And how can we help support this transition? Do you want to transition socially? How do you want to do this? And, the relief on this things. Sorry.
No, you don't apologize. We're not afraid of feelings here. No.
I hugged him and he was like, you're not disappointed in me? And I was like, have we met? Child, if you are male, great, then you're my son. And I said to them in that moment, I said, you're my child, and my job is to keep you safe and healthy. And what I want for you is to be who you authentically are and be able to find joy in the life. And if you were born in the wrong body, who am I to say you weren't? Of course I support you and I love you. And from that moment on, we started using masculine pronouns, he, him. If I can back up just briefly, when he came out as non-binary and we told the family, my ex-husband's family is Native American. My father-in-law had been an elder in the Native American community. Not that you would know it from looking at it with them, but in doing some of the research about transgender and non-binary people, we discovered the Native American two-spirit people. And so we started calling him two. And then when he came out as male and not non-binary, he also was able to recognize that there is still some of the feminine in him, but he still identifies as male. And I think the easiest part of this transition was the family. School was harder. And my mother was already passed, but my dad had trouble because he had dementia. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. And I think that was the dementia in him. But the rest of my family is, my son was so scared about whether or not he was going to be accepted that he asked me if I would be the one to tell our family. And so I got his permission on how I wanted to do it. And he said it was okay. And I told the family, and they just held him and loved him. And it was an instant, okay, great. So this is our nephew, or this is our grandchild, our grandson, or there was no pushback. There was no unkindness happening from anyone. Generally speaking, we had a few moments that were really hard, but generally my family and my dad was a hard one, but for most of my ex-husband's family, most of the time were really accepting and loving and kind and gracious and nurturing. It wasn't 100%, but generally family was very welcoming. School was less.
So from the home front, it sounds like this was maybe the best case scenario
100%
that someone going through this could experience.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the fact that your child came to you in the beginning to even talk to you about it, and then before even getting to this, that you guys already had really strong communication lines open.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, because as I'm looking at a lot of the conversations around this and the angry around all of this and trying to understand it, I think I just want to point out that when your child came to you, you didn't immediately pump them full of drugs and then get them to a surgeon. I just wanted to go ahead and...
Oh, that isn't even a possibility.
Right. So I wanted to really highlight that what I heard in this is that it was a lot of communication within the family. I also heard you talk about therapy being a big part of that kind of growth and care for your child. We're going through it. So that's kind of all of the things that I'm hearing.
Cultural understanding, parental communication and understanding.
And, we didn't just rush him off to magically make him physiologically male.
Yeah.
The rhetoric surrounding that is so damaging and so false. So breaking it down for you two who don't have trans parents and for anyone listening, here's what it takes to get medically treated when you are under 18 or 19 now. The first thing that has to happen is the child has to speak to the doctor. So we went to the pediatrician because he was 12 or 13 when all of this started. A pediatrician is not legally allowed to provide puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy. They're not legally allowed to do that. What has to happen is your child can go up. If you have a biological female child who is transitioning to male or non-binary and wants to stop periods from happening, assuming they've already been through puberty, the pediatrician can prescribe birth control to stop periods, progesterone-based birth control, which happens for so many reasons, not the least of which is transgender, but doctors do this all the time for young girls who are developing and having all kinds of problems with their, female sex organs, whether it's endometriosis or PCOS or any kind of thing, right? So this is not anything different than a doctor would normally do. But then what has to happen is you have to go to counseling and then you have to make an appointment with an endocrinologist who specializes in gender non-conforming people. There is one place in Colorado, one, that takes people under 18 and treats them for whatever kind of gender-affirming care they need. One place that services Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming. It was a 9-month wait just to get spoken with, just to do an intake. There was a telephone conversation that happened. That was the intake. It is an hour and a half or so from where we live. So by the time we were able to get an appointment to see the endocrinology department, I think 14 months had gone by.
Good.
And there's therapy that goes along with that. There's all kinds of stuff. Once you get seen by this place, we're speaking about the True Center in Denver right now, who is currently pausing all the gender-affirming care for those under 19 for fear of losing federal funding. I'll come back to that. I have a lot of feelings, and I'll explain why. But once you've met with that team, not only do you have to speak with a therapist there who is a mental health provider at that center who is different than the counselor that you've been seeing all along. You have to have labs done. You have to have all kinds of things. And then you also have to have parental permission. Then you have to get a letter. The minor child has to get a letter from their healthcare provider stating that they have discussed the gender dysphoria, they have discussed all of the things. And yes, gender-affirming care, whether that be puberty blockers for kids who have not been through puberty, whether that be hormone replacement therapy, testosterone, or estrogen. Sorry, there goes my dog. You have to have a letter from the therapist. Once you have the letter from the therapist, you go back to the clinic. So now 2 years have gone by. You go back to the clinic. And then assuming you've gotten that letter from your therapist, and assuming you have parental support, and it took both parents, even though we're divorced, it took both parents only then could hormone replacement therapy begin. It's also known as HRT. Women go through it all the time for menopausal treatment, right? They have hormone replacement therapy all the time. So my child went 2 years before they could even get on hormone replacement therapy, which at the time we had said we weren't going to do. When he first came out, we said we weren't going to do that. It was too late for puberty blockers, so we went on to a progesterone-based birth control to stop his periods. You can't even, another common misconception is a child under 18 can't even have surgery. There are very few surgeons who will perform gender-affirming surgery to a person under the age of 18. There are so many reasons why, but there are only 2 surgeons in the state of Colorado or in our area of Colorado that would be willing to do it, and neither of them accepted insurance and were booked out for 4 years. We found somebody in California, but if and when that happens, it has to be covered by insurance, because that's a $50,000 surgery.
Oh,
but
God.
I mean, to hear the rhetoric that people are just getting gender reassignment surgeries and being put on hormone replacement therapies and, at lunchtime or during recess, it's not physically possible. Legally, that's not how the system works. It is so hard. One of the most transformative experiences I had, we don't understand what gender dysphoria is like if we don't have it. And gender dysphoria, I watched it happen, right? I watched my son have it. And I thought I had a grasp as to what that really meant. That he was uncomfortable in his own body, and it's the wrong body, and the kind of anxiety and fear and self-loathing that comes with gender dysphoria. And we went to the pediatrician because we needed the doctor to look at a mole and check a rib that was popping in and out. And my child had to take the binder off. And when I tell you, if you've seen photos of giant sequoias, they're magnificent and they're huge. But when you're standing in front of it, the massive, monumental size of a giant sequoia is astounding and overwhelming, and you can't even pretend you have ever understood it until you're literally standing in front of it and you see how huge it is. Being in the same room with my son when he had to remove the garment that made him look and feel more like who he is. Seeing the gender dysphoria there was like standing in front of a sequoia. The size of it, the power of it, the sheer devastation of it. It's something I'll never forget, and I can't even fathom living with that in front of me, inside me, day in and day out for years. It has to be crushing, torture, and so heavy and so big. I mean, I held him while he shook and sobbed and hated himself and hated his body. And the loathing and the anxiety and the sheer amount of emotional devastation was something I didn't expect. Even though I'd been walking the path with him, I've been on the journey walking with him to make sure he's okay and being steady. And it was one of the hardest things as a parent that I've ever had to see, or I couldn't take it away. I couldn't make it better. It was just so powerful and so painful to watch. And there's no way any person could convince me that not allowing my child to be who he is supposed to be is for his mental health. But stopping the treatments that we were working on and not forcing him to be in that space of the body he was born in incorrectly was going to be good for him, because it would kill him. He would have not survived it. It made me feel a little bit like, as present and loving and supportive as I thought I had been, I wasn't doing enough to make him feel okay. Because someone who's going through this doesn't feel normal. They don't feel like they fit. They feel like there's always this big weight on them at all times, even if they're in a supportive friend group and family. And my child has a supportive family, and at the time, somewhat of a supportive friend group. Some of his friends were supportive. It was very eye-opening. It was an awakening that I was ill-prepared for.
Join us next week for the second half of Miriam's story. Remember, alone, we may not be okay, but together, we're all fine. See you next week.